The story unfolding in Gaza once again has brought global attention back to one of the most contested regions in modern history. Israel has launched new deadly strikes on Gaza City, intensifying a cycle of violence that has already claimed countless lives and created enormous suffering for ordinary people trapped in the middle. To understand the gravity of what is happening, it is important to break this situation down in a way that highlights both the technical and political aspects, while also keeping in mind the very real human impact on the ground. At its core, the escalation in Gaza follows years of unresolved conflict, occupation, and displacement. Gaza, one of the most densely populated regions in the world, is home to more than 2 million people, most of them refugees or descendants of refugees who were forced from their homes decades ago. For years, the region has been under a strict blockade imposed by Israel, restricting the movement of people, goods, food, medical supplies, and even basic necessities like electricity and fuel. This blockade, according to many international observers, has created a humanitarian crisis where life for Palestinians in Gaza is already extremely difficult, even without the added devastation of bombs falling from the sky. The recent airstrikes carried out by Israel were described as targeted operations against what it claims are militant sites. But the reality on the ground is far more complex. Gaza is an urban area with families living in close quarters, meaning that so-called precision strikes often result in heavy civilian casualties. Apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, and even mosques have been hit, sparking outrage among Palestinians and raising questions about the proportionality of Israel's response. This isn't the first time such attacks have been carried out, but each round leaves behind a trail of destruction that takes years to rebuild, if rebuilding is even possible under the blockade. From a technical standpoint, Israel uses some of the most advanced weaponry in the world. Its Air Force deploys fighter jets, drones, and artillery equipped with state-of-the-art targeting systems. These weapons are capable of immense precision, but the question that many ask is whether that precision is being used responsibly or if the strikes deliberately disregard the presence of civilians in the target zones. Palestinians, on the other hand, have little to defend themselves with. Gaza lacks a formal army, and its groups rely on improvised rockets and small arms, which are vastly inferior to Israel's arsenal. This imbalance in military power is at the heart of why so many around the world see Palestinians not as aggressors, but as victims of a disproportionate use of force. The consequences of these airstrikes are not limited to the immediate casualties. Every strike destroys infrastructure that is already crumbling. Electricity plants are targeted, plunging large parts of Gaza into darkness. Medical facilities are overwhelmed, struggling to treat the wounded with limited supplies. Families are displaced as their homes collapse, adding to the already staggering number of people living without shelter. Water systems, already fragile, break down further, leaving people without clean drinking water. These are not short-term inconveniences, but life-threatening conditions that impact every aspect of daily life. On the political level, Israel argues that these strikes are necessary to ensure its security, claiming that militants in Gaza launch rockets toward Israeli cities. However, the number of casualties and the scale of destruction in Gaza compared to Israel is often disproportionate. For every Israeli killed, dozens of Palestinians lose their lives, many of them children and women. This disparity fuels the narrative that Palestinians are enduring collective punishment rather than being defended against. Human rights organizations have repeatedly raised concerns that such operations cross the line into violations of international law. For Muslims around the world, the plight of Palestinians is more than just a geopolitical issue. It is deeply personal and spiritual. Gaza is not simply a piece of land. It is part of the wider story of Palestine, where families have been stripped of their homes and their right to live freely. The continued bombardment is seen as part of a larger struggle for dignity, justice, and survival. Many Muslims see themselves reflected in the suffering of Gaza's people, which is why protests erupt globally whenever violence escalates there. But beyond religion, This is also a humanitarian tragedy that should matter to everyone. No child should go to sleep not knowing if their home will still be standing in the morning. No parent should have to dig their children out of rubble after an airstrike. No society should be forced to live without the most basic human rights like freedom of movement, clean water, and access to health care. The question becomes not whether Israel has the right to defend itself, but whether its chosen method of defense respects the fundamental rights of millions of people who are essentially trapped in a giant open-air prison. There is also the question of international response. Every time violence breaks out, world leaders issue statements calling for calm, urging restraint, and sometimes proposing temporary ceasefires. But once the dust settles, very little changes. The blockade remains, the occupation continues, and Palestinians are left to pick up the pieces with little support from the international community. Aid does come in, but it is not nearly enough to rebuild what has been destroyed. Without addressing the root causes, land occupation, lack of sovereignty, and denial of basic rights, these cycles of violence are bound to repeat again and again. For ordinary people in Gaza, survival becomes the only focus. Parents skip meals so their children can eat. Doctors work around the clock in bombed-out hospitals. Teachers try to provide education in makeshift classrooms, even as trauma shapes the lives of every child. These are the untold stories that rarely make headlines, but paint the true picture of what it means to live under constant bombardment. At the same time, there is also the question of media coverage. The way events are reported often shapes how the world perceives them. In many mainstream outlets, headlines present the situation as a conflict between two equal sides, when in reality, the imbalance is staggering. Israel, with one of the most powerful militaries in the world, versus a besieged population with minimal resources. Framing it as an equal battle can mislead viewers into thinking this is a fair fight, when in truth Palestinians are living under occupation and siege. Another important factor is how these repeated assaults affect the long-term psychology of Palestinians. Generations of children have grown up knowing nothing but war, destruction, and displacement. This has profound consequences for their mental health and their outlook on the future. Studies have shown high levels of post-traumatic stress among children in Gaza, many of whom have lived through multiple wars before even reaching their teenage years. This isn't just about the physical destruction of homes and infrastructure, it is also about the destruction of hope, dreams, and the possibility of a normal life. When we consider solutions, the reality is complicated. Peace talks have failed multiple times, often because the fundamental demands of Palestinians, freedom, sovereignty, and the right to return, are not taken seriously. International law recognizes these rights, yet they remain denied. As long as the root issues are ignored, temporary ceasefires will only serve as band-aids on a much deeper wound. The recent strikes in Gaza should remind the world that this conflict is not frozen in the past. It is happening right now, in real time, with devastating consequences. Each missile fired leaves behind a family in mourning, a child traumatized, a community shattered. For Muslims, supporting Palestinians means standing with the oppressed, calling for justice, and refusing to normalize the idea that some lives are worth less than others. For the global community at large, it means recognizing that peace cannot be built on the foundation of occupation and inequality. This is not about ignoring Israeli concerns for security, but rather about demanding that security for one people cannot come at the expense of another's right to live freely. True peace will only come when Palestinians are no longer treated as second-class citizens in their own land, and when the international community stops turning a blind eye to their suffering. The deadly strikes on Gaza City are not just another round of violence. They are a stark reminder that without justice, without freedom, and without accountability, there can be no lasting peace.